conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in, no rushing. But time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Hey, here we are back, and we got our technical issues sorted out. It's old guys using the internet. It always is exciting. So welcome to the conversation with Harold and Dave. And if you're joining us, you didn't have any problems. We have been sorting out some things, but we're back and we've been on a little break and maybe it shows. But today we are going to talk about Roe v. Wade, the overturning of it and what's going on. There's a little bit more in the news from Kansas last night. And so we had the Supreme Court overthrow Roe v. Wade. And, I didn't introduce Harold. I'm sorry. Second time's not the charm. I'm Dave and that's Harold. Hey, Harold. So we've had this overthrow.
Glad to be back.
What do you think, Harold?
Yes.
Your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm in total disagreement with it for a number of reasons, but I think my two primary reasons is I think the notion of being pro-life has been enjoined with this notion of the need to being anti-abortion, and then the fact that you're now not allowing a woman to control her own body. If the roles were reversed and women were making decisions as it relates to men controlling their bodies, I'm sure you'll have men all through the streets protesting and things of that nature. But as it relates to this, I think the Supreme Court really missed the mark on this, and reverting it back to the states. Now you're going to have multiple states within the United States of America, but multiple states doing a number of different things, which, again, at the end of the day, we can look at just abortion, but also abortion is a form of healthcare. And true sense is not looking at its original, which we'll get into. I think we missed the mark, and because we did it in an extremist fashion, meaning there were no carve-outs or exceptions for rape, incest, or the health and welfare of the mother, that's a very dangerous situation to play and a game to play with the lives of others.
Yeah. Well, I think too, there's two things. One, there's a Supreme Court decision that said that no, there's not a fundamental right to privacy. States can, in fact, legislate on this. And then we have states legislating. That's what you're talking about, the extreme lack of carve-outs, lack of exceptions, right? Because it was a little garbled. I had a little trouble hearing you there. But that's what you're talking about, right? Is the state policy. Yes. And I think definitely when we look at this thing, the policy issues that the states are having are just, they're not dealing with them. And there are so many, as you pointed out in our first run through, right, when we did this earlier, there's just so many things coming out that are exceptions or, instances where the life of the mother's in danger, or, if you ban abortion, there's certain medical procedures that could be considered an abortion. I mean, all the complications and unanticipated problems that are coming out in this are just lots of them, right? And so from a policy point of view, I think these trigger laws and these knee-jerk, a lot of states had trigger laws that they put into effect, and they're bad policy because when they were written, it's something that's not going to happen, right? So it can be extreme, right. It can be black and white without any, concerns about complications. And so definitely, I think we're going to see just a lot of problems with that. Then there's there is that question. This is something that does come up to my mind when we talk about this issue. At what level can states have different rules, right? At what level are we going to be okay with states having different rules on issues? Because, if you say there's not a federal guarantee, a constitutional guarantee, states are able to now come up with varying rules. And there's a level at which it's like, all right, is that bad? I mean, what level are we happy with that? Or do we need to have consistent rules across states, or is there room for different states to have different points of view on issues like this? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge that we have is, who's talking to the medical practitioners? Who's talking to the women who have had to have an abortion or who've had complications that required an abortion? Now, I'm not talking about someone who goes out, live, quote unquote, recklessly, gets pregnant, has an abortion, goes out and lives recklessly again, goes out and has an abortion. That's not what, I'm talking about when I say I'm pro-abortion. I'm looking at those that medically need to have an abortion. For example, there have been a number of programs watched where they've interviewed women who've had abortions for different reasons. Now, some said that it was an unplanned pregnancy and they wanted to have an abortion. Well, you or I don't have a heaven or hell to put anyone in, and I'm not here to judge anyone. That's their right as a couple to make that decision. But if I'm a woman carrying a child who is deceased within my body, or a life that is deceased now, no longer living, and the only way to remove that life is through an abortion, these laws prevent that. And you've had women that have had to go across into other state or state lines to have that. And not even, I think it was about a week, maybe 2 weeks after that Roe decision, you had a 10-year-old girl in Indiana who was raped, who was impregnated, and had to go to Illinois to have an abortion. Now, some, depending upon which party you were in, they were trying to refute or dispute that this girl was even pregnant, that she had even been raped, until the rapist was identified, caught. And now, rather than say, hey, listen, this is something we need to go back and look at and maybe modify this decision or codify this so that those exceptions can be in place. No, we'd rather an all versus nothing decision, which endangers a lot of people. And that's where, my concern is as it relates to this, one of these issues in the Roe versus Wade decision.
Well, and, when we talk about the polling on this, right, and we talk about people's attitudes towards this, a lot of, there's very strong support for abortion being legal in most cases. And, that's usually the number that is the question that's asked. And so, there's legal in most cases, illegal in most cases, as the two poles of those questions. And, there's a lot, people are generally around the 60% level, very much in favor of abortion rights, legal in most cases. And even Republicans tend to, there's a huge polarization, a huge partisan divide on the issue. And there, so we do have that. But even, I kind of noticed that even amongst Republicans, it's like 38% of Republicans think it should be legal in most cases. And so, that's not that, there's still a lot of Republicans that think that. Also, when we look at the divides amongst, actually, when we look at male-female divides, the male-female divide is really strong amongst, primarily amongst white people. There's almost no male-female divide, interestingly, amongst African Americans. It's men are 66%, or one the poll I saw, women are 69. So interesting, African Americans just don't have a divide. Hispanics, a little more. But it's amongst white people. So we're seeing this conservatism. It's getting wrapped up and politicized in ways like you were talking about, being pro-life and all. And so it's interesting to me, though, when we look at it, how much as an issue, when we look at the strongly in favor of being legal in most cases, it's like 52%. So when we look at the salience, right, and there's approve, do you somewhat approve, do you strongly approve? The strongly approve, there's this huge overhang on the pro-right, on the pro-choice side of things. And so I'm looking at this as an issue that, Republicans were, a lot of them said, the social conservatives, I saw people say, look, this overturning Roe v. Wade, this is why I put up with Trump. This is why I held my nose and voted for Trump, because we wanted to get the judges in and we wanted to overturn this. And now they've done it. And so now they have it, right? And they're like, yay, we have it. And now I'm like, well, as an electoral issue, I think it's really very dangerous for Republicans because we have the first, with Kansas, they went to the polls last night and voted in a referendum and overwhelmingly voted to keep abortion. They had heavy turnout, and the turnout was very heavy amongst non-Democrats, amongst independents. And so, this issue is getting people to the polls in Kansas, right? And where people are being allowed to vote on it. Now, in a lot of places, the rules are going through the legislatures. They're gerrymandered and kind of institutionally locked in Republican hands, where the decision makers go through primaries and have to get elected by more radical elements. Both parties have the same problem. It's not just on the Republican side, but
right.
It's interesting, though, that Kansas had the opportunity to have voters go out, and it was like, whoa, wait a minute. And so we are seeing, like, DeSantis and a couple other governors are slowing their roll on, okay, what are we going to do about about policy? So I think it's an interesting, I think it's going to be as much of a problem for Republicans, and it might be, the blowback on it, I think, might be really powerful.
Right. And I think also when you look at the fact that, again, you made this a pro-life issue as opposed to a pro-birth issue. And, when you have, and I mentioned her previously, not specifically, but it was Representative Mary Miller out of Illinois, who at a Trump rally said, thank you, Trump, or President Trump, for saving white lives. And her statement, her saying the quote unquote quiet part out loud, really deals with this issue, and it unearths a train of thought that, hey, really, was this about saving lives or just white lives? Because I've had people, and I had that conversation, and it came to the point to where many in the evangelical circle, many in the church circle, utilized this, quote unquote, when Roe versus Wade was first decided back in the 70s, as their rallying cry to really begin moving in this direction, i.e. 50 years later, finally getting it overturned. But, the point is, are we really talking about pro-life, or are we really talking about pro-birth? Because my thoughts on pro-life is the fact that, okay, how do you feel on the death penalty? How do you feel on wars? How do you feel on some of these other issues, environmental runoff from major corporations that pollute the waters? Look at what happened in Flint, Michigan a few years ago, and what has happened, to those people that live, in Flint. So when you're looking at this whole notion of pro-life, I go beyond just abortion. If we're not thinking about all the other pieces, even environmental and climate justice, climate change, that's affecting lives. Days are hotter now. Things are much more steamier now. People are dying. So if we're going to be pro-life, let's be pro-life. But we have to look at all the other things that affect our lives as well. No one's talking to Big Pharma about the fact that how can we find a cure for certain things within a matter of months, i.e. COVID, but then we've had a cure for cancer, probably they're sitting on because they don't want to cure cancer, they only want to treat it because it's much more advantageous from a capitalistic standpoint. So again, I don't want to go too far off base, but when I look at Roe v. Wade and we look at why certain decisions are made and what the rallying cry was, it was pro-life, but we ignore all the other aspects of our lives. Why don't we have free health care so that people can go and get checked up regularly to prolong their life? You know, why is it once a child leaves the birth canal, they don't get the same level of support and energy than they do when they're in the uterus? So, you know, my notion of pro-life, you know, differs than many that were a part of this whole rallying cry, you know, for Roe v. Wade, even with me being against, you know, overturning Roe v. Wade.
Well, and it's interesting when you talk about this, you know, this is an issue, right? This is, as a conservative issue, in some ways, I have more sympathy for the anti-abortion folks in the sense that, you know, when we're talking about white supremacists, right? I got no use for these guys, right? You know, I mean, there's really no, I don't know that there's another side to it. But when we talk about abortion, and I'm very, you know, I'm pro-choice, absolutely, right? You know, this is a very solid. I actually, the one time I was a political activist, I was active in the pro-choice movement back one brief summer of activism. But I did, you know, I do understand that if you think that life begins at conception, then abortion is murder, and you have to be anti-abortion, right? I mean, putting aside the wrapping up in the pro-life packaging, just if we get down to just the abortion issue, I always understood that the folks who were against it, I disagreed with them. I thought they were wrong, but I understood that, you know, based on just one different assumption about the world, their point of view was very reasonable, and their vehemence on the issue was understandable. And so I've never, most of the time, I don't quite see it that way. And I remember when working with, in the, you know, this is in the 90s, or like, well, 1990 actually. The thing about it was that one of the interesting things was that when you tried to go out and be a pro-choice advocate and try to get people to vote and, you know, engage people, there was a suspicion of your motives, right? There was always, if you were pro-choice, if you're an activist, there was always a suspicion. What are you up to? What's your agenda? Largely because Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, and it's like, take yes for an answer. And that was always the thing that we would talk about, is we have to explain, because the motivation of the other side was obvious, but why are you guys out? And to be honest, the people that went out and protested and were active had a lot of other agendas. And I will, you know, I gotta say, we had the socialists out with us, right? You know, so I understood that. But now I think, you know, like your example of the 10-year-old, right, getting raped. And, you know, now I think a big change that's going to occur is it's going to be, now it's like, no, we understand why you're up. We understand why there's a movement. We understand why people are out on this issue because of this overturning. And then as we get more and more examples of this stuff, you know, I think that's going to change the underlying dynamic a bit in favor of people who are pro-choice. And that's something that, as I was thinking back on this, like, oh yeah, we used to have that problem. Guess we don't have that problem anymore. Why are you doing this? It's obvious why we're doing it. 10-year-old girl's pregnant. You know what? And by the way, you don't need to prove rape with a 10-year-old. It's by definition.
No.
This is one of my things.
Yeah, exactly.
This is one of my things is, if it's a child, it's rape. Period. Full stop. End of discussion.
Exactly.
And I don't know what people are thinking of. But somebody went offline. So, well, other things that we got going on, I guess I'll just talk about this a little more. We do have, like I say, we had the Kansas decision, we had the Kansas voting, we have people active on that. We are looking, I think, also at big movements in the Democratic Party, right? The Democrats are certainly going to be looking to capitalize on this, and as a pushback. And I think that is something that's, going to be a major portion here. It is interesting. It's a conversation. I've got one side. We got Keone somewhere to talk to me? All right, crop yourself in because I suddenly drew a blank. So how about Emmett Till? And are you going to come in and talk about that a little? There we go.
Well, that was a weird segue. How about that?
I don't know. I got nothing. I just suddenly I'm like, I don't know. I think I said everything I got to say on the.
I did want to pop into. I actually I wish Harold wouldn't have cropped out, but he'll be back because I wanted to talk about respond to some of the things he said. And one of the things I always hate to get into is when we talk about cures, right? Because there's a difference between communicable diseases and diseases that aren't communicable. The communicable ones are the easiest to solve. You just get people to do things and stop spreading it. I can't give you cancer, Dave, you know that, but I can give you the flu. I can give you a cold. I can give you chicken pox. I can give you all of these other things that are communicable. And the one thing about COVID is, and I was surprised, I was going to pick at Harold for saying it because it's usually the COVID's not real and anti-vaxxer people who bring up that it's something that was solved too fast. When you really dive into it, COVID was discovered way back in 2001 during SARS. It was in SARS. So it's not like there was no knowledge of COVID at all. It just wasn't something that was affecting the community in the world. Also, everybody pay attention to this. There's not a million people running around with lab coats like you see in movies, finding out cures and things like that. It's a lot of artificial intelligence is involved. We've kind of taken it out of the hands of us bumbling people in lab coats. Lab coats. So there's a lot that goes in that, and I really wanted to make fun of him for that, but he's not here, so I'll make fun of him later.
I will say his point though. I don't think that anyone's sitting on a cure for cancer because I think you could charge a crap ton for that.
Yeah.
And the other thing it suggests, I don't want to argue against Harold when he's not here, but whenever anyone says, "Oh, they developed it and they haven't used it," I'm like, "Well, they probably spent money researching it. Why wouldn't they be trying to recoup that investment?" Yeah. But I think his point is far better made if we just talk about insulin, right?
Yeah.
What's the price of insulin? And it's diabetes, and that's something that diabetes is a problem, and it's like it's also far more common amongst African Americans. So there's certain groups in the country that don't care, right?
It's funny that you bring that up because it deals with genetics. We know people who have high blood pressure that runs in their family, and diabetes, but these are things that you can weed out of your genetics. Spend more money. This, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, goes along. If you spent more money in the programs to help people get healthier, to get off the blood medication and to help with the diabetes, you wouldn't have to provide so much insulin. But as you were saying, the cost of insulin is a lot of money.
And insulin's cheap. I mean, it's as a chemical. There's no research. And so that, to my mind, is the example of if you're pro-life, you should be pro cheap insulin. That would be a simple way, and maybe you shouldn't have a death penalty. But I know there's some guys out there that really deserve it, but
listen,
there are too many people who are unjustly accused.
Yes,
and it's always a black person. I mean,
and you know what? It's so not equal. I mean, you can have a guy, and I'm not saying this is good. You'll have a guy that commits homicide or manslaughter or something like that, and he's on death row and out of here faster than a serial killer, or someone who's killed 30 people. You know why? We've got to get all the specials. We got to give time for news agencies to set up movies. We got to do all these things.
Yeah.
And again, if people are being falsely accused and given the death penalty, who the bleep cares that you've exonerated this person after he's been electrified?
Yeah. Well, and it's also just a thing of it's irreparable. But
so
we get away from that is all brought up. We get away from the abortion issue
in conversations. But what I wanted to ask you about that as well is, I always found it, when I see people protesting outside of now I've lost my train of thought, the centers, Planned Parenthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the only thing in their head is abortions. And when I did my Planned Parenthood research, it's like a small percentage of what they do is help people get abortions. There are so many things that they do. I wish my parents, when they were 20, had a Planned Parenthood when you're a first-time parent and you can go in there and get counseling and get help with the struggles of being I'm not a parent, but Dave, you're a parent, right? Are you a parent? Yeah, you're a parent. You know the ins and outs of having that first child and what that was like, and having someone to help you navigate through that or get you to resources that you may or may not have. There's so much that Planned Parenthood does, but these sect of people immediately just go to abortion in their head.
Well, that has been the thing that Planned Parenthood got wrapped up with abortion, and all the defunding of Planned Parenthood was, of course, just as policy, it was ridiculous. It was most of what Planned Parenthood is about providing reproductive health services to poorer women and very younger women, poorer women, people that don't have health care because you don't have health care, and and it's birth control, it's pap smears, right? And I mean it's about reproductive health. And so when they would say that Planned Parenthood got all this money, it's because they were providing services, not abortions,
right?
That Medicare or Medicaid was paying for, and it was kind of the thing of like, well, this is what you want to do. Very few Planned Parenthood things. They would, they might refer someone to a clinic, but very few of them actually did it.
Right.
But they got wrapped up, and we do have all this other thing of there is that amongst social conservatives, this vilification of sex, of sexuality, of this, if not vilification, this ambivalence towards that people need birth control, right? And it's like, look, if you don't want abortions, birth control would be an important thing. Keep your unplanned pregnancies down. But there's that whole, I mean, just think when that one grad student testified in front of Congress about not being able to get her that she was a grad student, she couldn't afford to get birth control, and Rush Limbaugh's erroneously making fun of her. She's having so much sex, she needs birth control. And it's like, how much sex you have doesn't affect how much your birth control pills cost. It's one price,
right?
And so you're stupid.
It's not like you're taking a pill for every time you're having sex.
And it's like, he was just totally just spewing at the mouth, making fun of her, and therefore feeding into some, basic kind of shaming, right?
Mhm.
It's this Madonna whore fixation that this dichotomy that folks have, and they don't understand that no, people have sex, okay, and that's normal and that's okay, and you need to
I love the people
manage.
who speak out about sex as if they're not having any. You know, uh,
and,
this.
and it is weird, and it's kind of like I think that is increasingly out of step, and I think it's very, what, if 62% are in favor of abortion being legal in most cases, I think people in favor of attitudes towards sexual privacy and other things are going to be more so, and so
Or
I
maybe
kind of
people
shake my head a little bit at these things.
or maybe the people complaining about sex are the ones who aren't having any. Maybe it's the opposite of that. And now we got to shame the ones who are. And this term of, you said the Madonna whore, it's that I always tell people, they go, I'm an adult, okay. I'm an adult. Everyone's a whore to somebody. Some people believe if you have sex outside of a relationship, you are. If you have sex with more than one person in a week, you are. Two people. The bar always moves. Everybody has their own determination of what makes you that or not. So it's like you're saying. There's just some things that make sense. Make contraceptives and birth control more accessible and easier. Like, I don't understand why that's such a hard thing to do. Well, I understand why, but um, and that, remember, in the older days, a little earlier in the past, instead of saying teaching about birth control, we teach abstinence. We know that's not realistic. For 98% of the world, that's not realistic. Abstinence. I tell everybody, full disclosure, I was a virgin until I was 23. I was doing that thing where I was waiting until marriage. At 23, when I realized I wasn't going to be married yet, I lost my virginity. And the first thing I said was, what the hell was I waiting on? This is wonderful. What was I doing? So, I mean, it's unrealistic to hold abstinence over teaching and providing birth control. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, abstinence programs have been shown to just not work, and that
People are having sex in the abstinence program.
well, and it just doesn't, and it's interesting. Other approaches. I mean, if you want to solve a problem, you go out and you approach it in a non-ideological way, and you say, look, all right, if we don't want young girls going out, and if your target is, because these things are usually aimed at young girls,
Mm-hmm.
they're, it's like, if you don't want them going out, you don't just tell them this abstinence thing. You tell them, the Poverty Lab did a thing where they tried a different social message, and they basically told young girls, yeah, these guys over here, they have STDs, and they just told them about all the STDs that they could catch, and they gave them information, and they said the rates dropped, right? And so you can go in you can encourage abstinence by sharing information that makes sense and that is there. And I forget the exact details, but their whole point was, we stopped trying to tell them something they already knew. We told them something they didn't know that was valuable information, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly. But being pragmatic, and this is what I talk about policy, right? You've got to fix your policy, and you've got to do something, and you've got to say, all right, what's our goal? Is our goal to reduce teen pregnancy? Is our goal to reduce unwanted pregnancy, whether it be teenagers or not? And that then you have to say, all right, how do we achieve that? What's the right policy to it? But that's, in a lot of ways, that's not what this has been about. The rules that have been put in place are about symbolic, affirming values, right? Taking symbolic moves. And so we're going to ban it, ban abortion. And, to what does that do? All right. It stops abortion, but it doesn't solve some of the other problems that you have. But that's not what people were interested in. And I think the problem is now that Roe v. Wade, as long as Roe v. Wade was there, you could pass whatever trigger law you wanted and make it as, preach to the choir, right? And do whatever you want. Now that it actually is going to take effect, you've got this problem of, hey, you're going to put this into place, and now you're going to start seeing the exceptions, the problems, the policy issues that are involved in it, the inconsistencies, and you're going to be stuck with it as a policy. And that, I think, is the trap that a lot of these states have just fallen into. And although there's a certain callousness to this, I mean, I can say it's a trap, but along the way, a lot of people, mainly women, are going to be hurt by this. Women will die because they can't get an abortion, right, or they delay getting an abortion, or they delay treatment, or and that's really bad.
I think people forget that women still die, a mortality rate. Women still die giving childbirth. They think that's like a thing that was during the medieval times, or it's still happening today, people. Two things I wanted to mention about what you talked about. I forgot the first one, but we're also going to save the Harold tweeted me. We're going to save the Emmett Till portion for when he gets on. We'll do a whole episode on that because I don't want to just dive into that without him. But we talked about women. I hate the politicizing of everything, right? You've made this rule, you've overturned things overnight, and now as we keep going, there's all these amendments that are going to be having to happen, like you guys talked about the 10-year-old girl. But I feel like a lot of states are holding this because they'll overturn it, but you always know what happens when things get overturned. What can we add to put in that we want to give you this? What's the quid pro quo? We'll overturn Roe v. Wade, but we're going to do this thing that we've been trying to do forever that you don't want us to do. That's what I'm worried about. Here, well, the whole look at this over here while we do this thing,
right,
goes on all the time.
Yeah, and I'm blocked on an example to bring up with that, but I think you
look what it started. We've got the Roe v. Wade, and now we're talking about overturning gay marriage, and it's like now are we just going to start going backwards now?
Well, that brings up the whole Supreme Court side of things, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a separate, that's a different thing where the Supreme Court is now, you really have had Republicans attempting to, or not attempting, they succeeded in getting judges that would push back against what was perceived as decades of judicial activism. And, there's a question of some of the, and here's something where, again, I'm kind of like, the right, Roe v. Wade had this idea that there was a right to privacy. And, it basically asserted there was a right to abortion based on a right to privacy. And in some ways, it's a contrivance. It's a set of reasoning. It's an extrapolation from the original text of the Constitution and an evolution of rights that, in a lot of ways, it can't literally come from it, right? Right. There's this aspect of the Supreme Court has had a tradition of making new law, right? And updating our rules and interpreting the Constitution in a way that was expanding rights and doing things. But in a lot of ways, courts have been legislating, right? You know, there's that concept of, you know, hey, you've come up with these rules for abortion that are really, it's legislation. And it's, you know, there's always been an argument that the failure of legislators in Congress and all to update things and keep things current necessitates that. But now this is rolling it back, right? This is rolling back that, and like you say, the gay marriage. That's another thing that you know. Yes, if you can roll this back, you can roll that back, because you can question whether or not they were right. You know, the judges at the time were right to do that. And this is in arguing about this, is kind of this thing of like, you know, I'm like, well, yeah, they do this. And I think that that's a proper function of the Supreme Court. I think that's part of what works about our system. Mm-hmm. But there's, you know, this thing of like, well, if they're doing things, you know, they'll do things that you like sometimes, and they'll do things you won't like other times. Uh-huh. And it's undemocratic. It's, you know, it's there. And so if we complain about them rolling back these things, and I feel we should, but the arguments there that, oh, well, you're taking this activism and you're doing things that you shouldn't do, it's almost the same argument against them doing it in the first place. Right, against them establishing those rights in the first place. And so I have trouble with this because I can't see a consistent logical argument there that supports my side. Right, and I'm definitely on the side of this, but you know, what are we supposed to do with this? Right, I mean, are courts supposed to take into account evolving social consciousness and norms and societal conditions, or is that the legislature's job? I don't know. Yeah.
Like a catch-22. I want to wrap up with these final thoughts. I'll go first and let you go, and you can send us. Wait, I want to know from you, who does Roe v. Wade hurt the most? And the second one is, what do you see happening because of the Roe v. Wade decision? And I'll go first. I think Roe v. Wade hurts the most people who have unwanted pregnancies, as we talked about earlier, whether it's during sexual assault, rape, and no kid wants to hear that they're an accident, so let's spare them of that. And what I see coming out of it is people birthing children in terrible situations. We talked about it on another show. Kids don't ask to be born, and there's a lot of kids that are born into terrible situations. And some people will say, well, it's better than not being born. Who says? If I've never been born and don't know the pain of what's coming, what's wrong with that? But being born in a situation where the birth wasn't warranted, and my mom and dad may not be married, they may be a fling, they may not be in the right financial situation. Next thing you know, I'm living in a situation that's not conducive for me to grow and be nurtured into, you know, an adult who can contribute to society. You're adding more people that need more resources, that need more programs, that need more care, and something's got to give. You know, something's got to give. And I just feel for any child that's going to be born in situations that are just not conducive for them to be born into. And most cases, women that are having abortions know why they're having abortions, and they're having it for a reason. Okay. And we're not talking about the irresponsible women who just go out and keep getting pregnant and having abortions, because that's what people like to bring up. They love to bring up the outliers. We're not talking about the outliers. So that's my feelings on that, of who it really hurts and what I see happening with this overturn of Roe versus Wade. What about you, Dave?
Well, one, I do want to say, you know, Harold talked about, you know, women who use abortion as birth control.
Yeah,
right, is what you're talking about. Harold called those folks reckless. you called him irresponsible. At another level, and we could see there is in this a disdain for abortion, which I think everyone understands that they don't like the idea. It seems like you're killing. If it's not a human life, it seems, we're freaked out by it a little. Okay. However, I don't know that that's irresponsible or reckless. I mean, that's a choice. So I would say that I'm a little uncomfortable calling anyone in that position irresponsible or reckless. Not to get in y'all's face or in any way, but I would push back a little on that from an ideological point of view. As a practical matter, when we talk about what I think you mean the overturn of Roe v. Wade. At some level, I wonder how much impact there is in some cases. Certainly, in most states that are anti-abortion, they have had a war on abortion clinics, right? So we've already got a situation in the United States where in some states it's really just impractical. There might be one clinic and it's a fortress and it's, and so as a practical matter, folks weren't getting that except for the medically necessary ones. And so at a certain level, I don't know when it comes to the general availability of abortion that much will change as a result of Roe v. Wade, because it goes to states, and states that are okay with abortion and their abortion clinics will be more prevalent in the red states, maybe not so much. I think though what you're going to get is these exceptions, that the medically necessary ones, and so you're going to have I think that is going to be a disproportionate number of folks who are affected by this, because that was what was available anyway. And I think that as a result of that, though, we're going to see a lot more political pushback on that decision. And so I don't want to be I don't want to in any way be optimistic, but in some ways, I think that there may be more of a silver lining than rain from this cloud, in that with the exception of the medically necessary, if people are stupid enough to stop medically necessary abortions, that's going to be the main concern. The concept of elective abortions, that, I think already the red states have clamped down on those to the point where they're just not available. And so I kind of see that as a practical matter, what's being impacted here.
That's a lot to take in. Well, that was our final thoughts in Roe v. Wade. Please leave comments on what you think about the overturn of Roe v. Wade. You can comment on if you agree with the things that we talked about and discussed. You can also say if you disagree. We don't hate anyone for disagreeing, but if you do disagree, always bring points. The one thing I really hate in life, when someone says you're wrong or this sucks, but they don't provide you reasons of why you're wrong or why it sucks. So don't bring the problem without the solution. Join us next time on the conversation. We'll be talking about Emmett Till and the recent events revolving around what's going on with the woman, because I hate calling her by name, that accused Emmett Till of doing what he did, and we all know the history of what happened there. But this was a great conversation with you, Dave. Welcome back from your long break in DSL hell. And we look forward to having much more episodes with the awesome Dave. Check out his YouTube channel. Dave, what's your YouTube channel?
lhayesart.com. That's my wife's YouTube channel. That's the one to check out. I have a Dr. Dave Hayes channel where I talk about international relations, but this summer I've spent a lot of time helping my wife with her L. Hayes Art thing, where we go and that's actually pleasant to watch. There's some, you can see what I was doing in DSL hell, otherwise known as Maine, and lots of art. We've been going around talking to artists throughout the summer and seeing the sights of Maine, and that's much more. Drop by there. That's a lot more fun to see than
It's
me.
fun to see, but Dave is so humble. It's fun to see, but Dave has a lot of great points. His opinions are always backed by research, a lot of facts when he formulates his opinions. It's a lot of good information. Expand your mind, get education, learn something from this guy. He's an awesome guy. He's just humble, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Bye-bye.